Hi, my name is Dr. Samir Thukral and I'm a periodontist practicing in Pune, India. Today I'm going to be discussing the factors that influence the decision making process whenever any hard or soft tissue augmentation is needed for an implant based treatment. We all know that following tooth loss, bone loss results within for the first 4 months, 56% at the expense of the buccal bone and up to 30% bone loss at the expense of the lingual bone. We also know that over prolonged periods of times, there is recession of the soft tissue as it follows the hard tissue and keratinized tissue may become deficient. The role of keratinized tissue in the long-term survival and implant maintenance itself is a controversial topic with researchers giving us opposing views on its requirement. Now, success of implant-based treatments can be based on several factors such as case selection, medical status of the patient. However, the main basic factors that are responsible for its success are the correct prosthetically driven position of the implant, adequate hard and soft tissue volumes, and optimal occlusion. So let's come to the case that we are discussing today. This is a case report of a 36-year-old female patient who had a missing lower left first molar for more than 10 years. And so she showed grossly deficient hard and soft tissue volume along with mesial migration of the lower left second molar. This is a preoperative cast showing the mesial tipping of the lower left 7. This is a preoperative OPG that was taken even before the diagnostic casts were done, and the third molar on the left hand side, lower left hand side, was extracted. The treatment plan was that we would need some kind of orthodontic intervention to upright the second molar and improve its occlusal contact using a lingual arch and replacement of the missing molar with a dental implant. Now she was an Angles class 3 classification of malocclusion. However, she was not interested in treating the malocclusion, and so we stuck to the initial assessment of using a lingual arch to upright the lower left second molar and improve its occlusal contact with the opposing molars. These photographs have been taken once the uprighting was completed with the lingual arch. This is a close-up view to show the deficiency of the soft and hard tissue bone, and it can be clearly seen here as well. That's the same view from the occlusal view, the same demonstration from the occlusal view. And now coming to the treatment planning for the implant. This is an article by Dr. Neil Bhattodekar and Dr. Amit Gharpure, and it discusses the importance of assessing the keratinized tissue at the start of the treatment. And this is a very simple flow chart that they've given where the first step is the assessment of the keratinized tissue, and you either have either adequate or inadequate keratinized tissue. So inadequate if there's anything less than 2 millimeters on the buccal and lingual flap combined. Of course, if you have adequate, then the next step is to consider your alveolar width dimension. Again, alveolar width dimension could be either adequate or inadequate, and I'm going to focus more on the left hand side of this chart because that's where it discusses the deficiencies. If there is no soft tissue or hard tissue deficiency, then of course you straight away go in and place the implant and there is no regenerative treatment needed there. However, if either the soft tissue or hard tissue are inadequate, or maybe both are inadequate, then the sequence of events follows as per the left hand side of this flow chart. So if you have inadequate soft hard tissue and inadequate soft tissue, then you could consider minor correction for minor corrections, implant placement first if there is adequate bone, and you could consider doing the soft tissue augmentation at the time of the exposure of the implant at the second stage. If there are major corrections needed, then you could even consider simultaneous soft tissue augmentation at the time of the implant placement. However, if the bone is also inadequate, then you should consider doing the soft tissue graft first, wait for about 6 to 8 weeks for that to mature, and then consider towards correction of the hard tissue. The hard tissue correction, again, if it is grossly deficient, then you could consider augmenting only the hard tissue first, allow for that bone to mature, and then anywhere between 3 to 6 months following the augmentation of the bone, you consider your implant placement. If the hard tissue deficiency is minor, then you can consider placing the implant with simultaneous hard tissue augmentation. So for our case, since there was deficient hard and soft tissue volume, um, this was the decision making process that we went through. The step one was that there was inadequate keratinized tissue less than 2 millimeters. There was inadequate alveolar bone as well. However, this was minor when examined on the CBCT. So our decision making process involved first augmenting the soft tissue with a free gingival graft, which would be left there for about 6 to 8 weeks to mature. And following this, we would place the implant with simultaneous hard tissue augmentation. So the first step of the soft tissue graft, this procedure was carried out by Dr. Neil Bhattavdekar, and this is how we went about doing it. A crestal incision was given and we raised a partial thickness flap. A free gingival graft was harvested from the palate and checked for its size at the recipient site. Once the free gingival graft was harvested, the epithelium was thinned down and eliminated, leaving just a little thin layer of the epithelium on the crestal part. The graft was nicely packed into the partially raised flap and leaving the epithelial part of the graft exposed to the oral environment and then stabilized and sutured. That's the occlusal view. The follow-up at 1 week looked like this. You can clearly see the epithelial slough of the part that was left outside, and this is how it looked from the occlusal view. That's the donor site at 1 week, which was showing pretty good healing, and the patient was also comfortable. At the time of the surgery, a palatal stent was given to the patient with instructions that it was not to be removed for 48 hours and to continue using it if there was any burning sensation while eating. So to wear the palatal stent and then eat during the healing phase. This is what it started to look at 4 weeks and then again at 8 weeks, and at this stage we were ready to go ahead with the implant placement. And you can see that there seems to be adequate gain of keratinized tissue in the future implant site. The same thing from the occlusal view. So we went ahead with the surgical placement of the implant. This surgery was done by me, and papilla preserving incisions were given with vertical releasing incisions in the area. A full thickness flap was raised and the osteotomy was then prepared. A little decortication was done to maintain a good blood supply for the graft. Some amount of autogenous bone was harvested from around this site using a bone scraper, and that autogenous bone was put as the first layer on the implant, and this was then covered by the BioOS bovine xenograft. The graft was then covered by the BioGuide collagen membrane, and the membrane was stabilized using bone tacks. The flap was then sutured using PTFE 50 sutures, and this is what the periapical radiograph looked like immediately following the surgery. We decided to keep the lingual arch throughout this period because we did not want any kind of relapse of the second molar, and we didn't want it to tip forward. So the lingual arch was maintained as a constant feature throughout the procedure. This is what it started to look like at 8 weeks. However, we held on for the maturation of the graft, and we only looked at the second stage after 5 months of carrying out the implant placement. A crestal incision was given once again so that we could carry out the exposure. However, at this stage, I decided to slightly apically displace the flap, and so vertical releasing incisions were given. The cover screw was then replaced by the healing abutment, and the flap was then apically displaced and sutured. At this stage, I've used a healing abutment which was 5 millimeters in length. However, subsequently, once the healing had taken place, since there was a little growth of the flap over the healing abutment, I went ahead and changed this with a 7 millimeter height healing abutment so that there was no further growth of the soft tissue over the healing abutment. This is what it looked like at 4 weeks after the surgical exposure was done, and we were now ready to go ahead with the um, final impressions. That's the periapical view of the radiograph immediately after the exposure was done, and it looked pretty good at the time of the impressions. The lingual arch was removed at this appointment itself before the impressions were made. Once the impressions were made, we temporarily refitted the lingual arch so that there would be no further migration of the second molar uh, during the fabrication of the final prosthesis. This view actually shows really well the amount of tissue gain that we've achieved both of the soft and hard tissues, and that's a quick comparison with the preoperative view to show the amount of tissue that has been gained. So an open tray method was used for making the final impressions, and a customized milled titanium abutment was fabricated along with a porcelain fused to metal crown. This was going to be a cement retained crown, and the reason for this prosthetic design was because the implant was really quite deep inside, and as I spoke about earlier, that the healing abutment that I placed was 7 millimeters long, and so as to bring the restorative margin just about 0.5 millimeters sub gingival, we fabricated a customized abutment over here, and the screw vent was left open so that the crown could have been so that the option of cementing the crown outside the mouth could be maintained, cleaned up, and then inserted into the mouth as a screw retained prosthesis. This is apologies for the wrong caption, but this is what it looked like, and basically wanted to show you how much the occlusion had improved for the second molar at this stage, and you can compare it with the preoperative cast photographs that we have. So the crown was cemented on the cast, and the excess cement was cleaned out, and this was then inserted into the mouth as a screw retained crown. This is what it looks like, and it actually shows a good amount of keratinized tissue around the implant, which is now more than 2 millimeters, thus achieving the objective that we had at the start of the treatment. That's the occlusal view and the immediate periapical radiograph at the time of the fitting of the crown. This is what it looks like in occlusion, and the occlusal view of the crown once the final fit was done. That is the radiograph after 15 months. I unfortunately don't have the final clinical picture to show you the follow-up. Hopefully once things settle down with the COVID, I would be able to take photographs of the clinical situation as well. So to conclude, the sequential rich augmentation protocol is a great assessment tool that gives you clarity in the analysis of your cases prior to subjecting the patient to any kind of surgical intervention. It very well defines the sequence that you need to follow in your decision making process, and by achieving this you can make sure that you have adequate volumes of soft and hard tissue around your future implants, thereby improving the prognosis of the treatment outcome, and to be able to better maintain health around the implant over a period of time. So I hope you liked this presentation. Thank you for a patient listening. Hope to see you soon. Take care.